Welcome to the show, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I really looking forward to this.
So, what's your sober date?
Sober date is March 10th of 2022, so I am coming up close to 3 years, not quite, but um, yeah, it's the longest I've ever had sober um, to date, and it shocks me every time that I even get another day sober. You know, the longest I had sober before this, I had a couple stretches of a year, and I'd always relapse on that 13th month. That month after I get my year, I would go back out again. And so it just every time I think about having over 2 years sober, it's not about the time sober, but it's still quite an accomplishment for me,
That's
nonetheless.
weird. I relapsed on my 13th month too. The first time I got sober, I went 13 months exactly, and like to the day, 13 months, and I relapsed with drinking.
Hmm.
And I bought a 6 pack, and then I poured the first two out just to prove that I'm not an alcoholic, because an alcoholic has to finish every drop.
Right.
But really, only an alcoholic will pull some shit like that. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Um, what was going on March 9th to 2022?
oh man, March 9th. Uh, I so I took my last drink on my birthday, March 4th. But I had like, I don't know, an eighth of weed left, um, and a little bit of coke. And I wasn't gonna flush that shit down the toilet. So I took my last drink on my birthday, and then like the last week, that following week, I just kind of finished. I finished the coke I had, and then I just smoked the rest of the weed. And the entire time I was doing that, it wasn't going inside my head that I needed to go back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, you know, and it was shaky because you do that. It was the classic. Okay, I'm gonna finish what I have, and then I'm gonna get sober. That it was like, am I lying to myself? Am I justifying? What am I doing? All that stuff that we do as alcoholics and addicts. But I think I just knew that my life at that point was still together, and typically that's not the case. When I'm getting sober, the first couple 24 hours that I'm sober, generally speaking, I don't have anything to my name. I don't have a place to live. I don't have. My family's gone, and I burned all my bridges. And in this situation, when I got back into the rooms this time around, man, I still had my job. I still had my car. I still had my place to live, and I was still paying my bills, and I was functioning. And it's just not typical. And I just had this fear in my head, fear in my mind that my luck was about to run out, man. Like everything that I had materially was swirling around that toilet bowl, and it was about to go right down the shitter. And like I feel like I just remembered that feeling of hopelessness I had felt when I was homeless at one point. And I'm like, this is exactly what's going to happen if I stay out even one more day. And for whatever reason, man, I just got back in there the next day. And, the first couple meetings I was at, um, before March 10th, I was high, I was stoned, going in there. But I think the light bulb did go off a little bit that, this is where the hope is. This is where my life will turn for the better, So
Yeah, where are you originally from?
I'm from a town called Saratoga Springs, New York, upstate New York. It's known for the horse racing. They do actually this past year they had the Belmont there, one of the Triple Crown races. They held it there because that racetrack is under construction. But they do. It's big. It's a big, well-known town, known for horse racing. And I grew up there. I went to kindergarten through 12th grade. I went to a decent school. I had a great upbringing. I did not have that typical upbringing you would think of as somebody that would turn into an alcoholic. My mother was a nurse, or it still is a nurse, not was, and my father he was in the Navy, and he works in hydroelectric power plants, and he's done that his entire life. So I had all the advantages growing up as a kid, man. We lived in nice little neighborhoods. I had a group of friends. We would always play like, pick up basketball or, um, you know, uh, our yard when growing up, my yard, we had like, I don't know, 40 yards on the side. And we used it as like a little mini football field. And I remember we'd watch football on Sundays, and we'd get a group of 6 or 7 people from the neighborhood, and we'd play pickup football games during half times on Sundays. Um, Man, I had a good childhood. There was not, I was raised right, all those things. But like I said, alcohol and drugs don't discriminate.
Yeah,
My
that's how it was for me.
Yep.
That's how it was for me. My parents were together until my dad died. Like, I never needed for anything growing up. Same thing with my friends. We played, fucking basketball, football, baseball together, played manhunt or, whatever you want to call it, like suey, like just grew up all together, just doing the right things.
Mm-hmm.
But I was 11 when I discovered alcohol and 12 when I started drinking alcoholically.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were not alcoholics. You know what I mean? Like they're the furthest thing from an alcoholic. But like you said, it doesn't discriminate. How old were you when you discovered alcohol?
I took my first drink when I was 13 years old. I remember it distinctly. It was a PBR. I was hanging out with my cousin, and at that point, I always felt like from the day I entered kindergarten and all the way through until I graduated high school. I mean, really all the way up until, really now almost, but especially then, that I never fit in. I was definitely felt like an outcast. I growing up, I was diagnosed. I had a learning disability. They labeled me right away in school with this learning disability, and I had to get. And it was so like right, and it was right from the jump. I mean, I'm talking kindergarten, first grade. They were like pulling me from classes to get it to take the state tests and stuff, and they would pull me and they put me in another room, and I didn't really know why at first, but I was getting extra time to take tests. They said I had reading comprehension problems and that I couldn't, and I was struggled with math and like everything academically. I was like slower than the rest, man. And right from there, that's when I realized I was like different, and not in a good way. Like it felt like I was labeled this way at the beginning and from the jump, and it definitely felt. It made me feel like it made me feel inadequate, man. Right off the bat. And I got picked on. I got bullied a little bit here and there. It started kind of just, as it was. But and I feel like it all stemmed from just the kids seeing me, getting pulled, doing different things than what they were doing. It just made me look like an easier target, maybe. But yeah, right from that point is when I realized like I did not feel comfortable in my own skin. I'm like, why are they pulling me to take tests, and why am I in this occupational therapy and speech therapy? I was in all kinds of crazy stuff, man. So yeah, by the time I was 12 or 13, have any just had that overall feeling of just not being comfortable in my own skin from those types of labels that were placed on me, I think early on in school. And I didn't fit in any crowd. And I mean, drugs and alcohol. And it wasn't drugs at first; it was just alcohol. But when you're young and stuff, everybody, it's like, oh, we should try it, So I remember I didn't drink with I went down to visit my cousin. He lives in the Catskills at the time, and that's when I took my first drink. And I remember feeling that sense of relief, man. That
warm blanket.
Yes. Oh, it was unbelievable, man. And you forget completely. I forgot all about, you know, my issues in school, you know, socially and academically. And, you know, I spent most of my and when I hit middle school, by the time I hit middle school, man, from middle school, and even through high school, man, I was the kid that put their headphones in, listen to their music, and just block the world out, man. Pretty, and that's all I did. And I was I didn't drink, only drank when I could get it, you know, when I had access to it or I was able to get it. But it was, you know, when I didn't have it, I was thinking about ways to get it, you know. So
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, I had it easy. My parents would throw parties. They
Mhm.
weren't drinkers. So they would have leftover liquor from the parties and they would put it in the basement. And I would go down the basement and steal the leftover liquor.
Mhm.
Um, and I was bullied, you know what I mean? Because I'm a bigger guy. So I was bullied for my size. And when I was 11, I discovered alcohol. And when I was 12, I started drinking alcoholically. I don't mean I was drinking every day at 12, but
Yeah.
I was drinking to ease the pain of the day. And
Right.
to me, that's drinking alcoholically when you're 12 years old.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You if you're not drinking, that's what makes us alcoholic. We're drinking for the effect of it, you know, the effects it creates inside of us, not
Yeah.
for the enjoyment of having a beer. You know, some people can go to the bar and order a pilsner glass of some hoppy beer, man. Have one, maybe two, and leave, or enjoy a glass of wine at dinner, you know, at a nice restaurant, and that's it. They're not thinking about it. They're not obsessing about it, man. I don't know. I needed it. I hated the taste of alcohol. I never enjoyed the taste of alcohol. It was never about the taste, man. It was, you know, it
The
was like
effect it produced.
slam a 6 pack in 15 minutes to get that initial euphoric rush, and then but of course, being having addictive, impulsive type of personality, man, I just didn't stop there, you know.
I
So
barely even drank beer in high school. Like, I only drank beer in high school when it was for a party.
yep,
When you're playing like beer pong or flip cup or any of those party
yep,
games,
yep.
that's when I would drink beer. But I would usually drink hard liquor
Hard.
because I had a tolerance that I built up since I was 12. Because by the time I was 14, I was drinking every single weekend
Mm-hmm.
and being a weekend warrior and, you know, just partying it up. I was friends with older people. So I would go to their parties where they would have beer and liquor. I
Mm-hmm.
had friends that were older too,
Yep.
um, and they could buy me alcohol. So I had friends that had older brothers or sisters, and they would buy us alcohol. So like I never had to worry about how I was getting liquor. I mean, it was a concern on Friday, like, all right,
Yep.
who's gonna come through this weekend and get us some alcohol? Like, who's gonna come through
Yeah.
for us? Which sibling? And you know, you play that game. So you're drinking for the effect in high school, basically.
Basically, yep. Drinking for the effect in high school. Like I said, it was always stemmed from, and I always say I cannot blame it on my upbringing. In fact, if it weren't for my good upbringing that I did have, man, I don't know where I'd be. You know, um, no, my parents, they cared, and they did everything they could to try to help me. You know, my mom grew up in an alcoholic household. You know, my aunt and uncles, her siblings, and some of my cousins, they've all struggled with alcoholism and addiction, past or present, man. And you know, I just had a family member pass away recently, at 45, an aunt, in her mid 40s, from cancer. And man, every single one of them has wrestled with this demon, for whether they're wrestling with it currently or had in the past. Man, it was definitely in my genes. And but like I said, I grew up with a fan with parents that cared, so they did everything they could to try to get me the help I needed. But you know, man, sometimes that's not enough. And I definitely, yeah, man, I felt that first wave of like pure, like that warm blanket you were talking about earlier, man. Like it was that, oh, I couldn't get enough of that. And the thing was, is I threw a party at my parents' house one time, and they left to go. They said they were going down to the city or something like that for the night. So I had the house to myself. I was like, all right, bet. I'm gonna, I'm gonna invite all my friends over. We're gonna throw a party here. And I get trashed off tequila and vodka and all this stuff. I stopped drinking hard liquor after this day. Actually, my house was trashed. Things were stolen out of it. My parents had come home that night later on, and that was it. I had made a fool of myself at parties, man. I puked, and I just became this like pariah. So after a couple bad experiences with people at parties, like house parties, man, I became that closet drinker. I stayed at home. I isolated. Growing up as a kid when you're in high school, and even after I graduated, I went to community college, so I still lived at home. I had to hide it really well, the best I could.
Yeah, my nickname in high school was Mess.
Mess. Yep.
That was my nickname in high school because that's how drunk I would get at parties and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike you, it didn't deter me from showing up to parties and making an ass out of myself. I was still drinking at home on weeknights. That's the thing. On weeknights, on school nights, I had a bottle hidden in my room, and I would take shots while I was like playing Sega and shit like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my bedroom was the attic converted into a bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents rarely ever came up my stairs because they were such a pain in the ass to come up the stairs.
Oh, word.
Or I would hear them open the door, and I knew I had 8 seconds to like hide my shit before they got to the top of my staircase.
Right, you were in the
It was like it went up and then around. Like it was like a weird design. So I had time to like hide the bottle and shit like that. And
yeah,
I never got caught. But I would do that during the school week. And then by the time I was a senior in high school, it was on, man. I was drinking heavily every single night. I was going to parties 6-7 nights a week. Like I had friends that, were allowed to throw parties at their house, and I would just be at their house all night drinking and shit like that.
Yep.
My dad had to go to Massachusetts for work when I was a senior.
Okay.
And Sunday through Thursday, he'd be in Massachusetts. And my mom, God bless her, she would fall asleep in the living room reading a book every night. And I would walk in drunk at 1 o'clock in the morning, and she would be like, "What time is it?" And this is before cell phones.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Oh, it's 10 o'clock." And then I would run upstairs knowing she would fall asleep again. Then she would wake up like 5 minutes later. And you know how like when you fall asleep and you wake up and it's 3 hours later?
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to her. We've talked about it now. And she remembers me always walking in at curfew. But she was like, "I can't believe you were walking in at 1 o'clock in the morning on those nights."
Yeah.
Like I had school at 8:30.
No recollection. Like you were shocked them kind of, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
she took a lot of the blame for how I turned out, unfortunately. And I've had to have multiple conversations with her that like, it's not your fault. You did everything for me that you could.
Yep.
And she's like, "I feel like I failed as a parent." I'm like, "Look at the other 2 kids you have. Do you have brothers or sisters?"
I have a younger sister. Yeah. She's 6 years younger than me, and she's not an alcoholic, and she graduated high school and got an apartment in Brooklyn. And she's been living, she travels, man. She was in France a couple months ago for like 2 weeks. Like she's very smart with her money. She has a good job, man. She basically learned from all my mistakes. And so when you bring asking about siblings, man, I always felt like I was the black sheep of my family, man. Like I felt like that, like, I got that gene, man, that addictive gene, not necessarily the alcoholic gene, but I equate it to that gene, that's impulsive gene. You know,
No,
that
yeah. My brother and sister aren't alcoholics at all. I have a brother 3 years younger and a sister 9 years younger.
yep.
My sister already owns two houses. She rents one out and then she owns a second house. My brother has bought two houses and I'm still in an apartment. Like,
Oh yeah,
you know
yep.
what I mean? And actually, the day I went to rehab 6 years ago, well, 6.5 years ago now, but the day I went to rehab, my brother closed on buying his first house.
Well,
Like
you,
he
yeah.
signed the paperwork and then he came and picked up my dog for me
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't bring my dog to rehab. So he
Yep.
picked up my dog for me after he signed the papers and then I went to rehab. So like my
But think
parents
about it.
celebrated my brother and then like they total downfall of me going to rehab.
Yeah, and that shit kills us. Like, you're like thinking, and like I remember sitting in rehab sometimes, and my sister's, you know, out there living her life, and you know, and I'm grateful, I'm happy for her and everything, but it feels crappy that, like, I don't know, like, what did I go wrong, man? And you start beating yourself up, man, and you're like, God damn, you know, if I just made a couple smarter decisions here, maybe I wouldn't get caught, and then this would have happened, and we start playing that game in our heads, and that's what kills us. It killed me. You know, for so many years, I put so much uh, priority or so much importance on the ability to be an independent person and pay my bills and not be, you know, dependent or codependent, whatever you want to call it, financially on my family. You know, if I messed up, you know, I had the abilities and I created a lot of opportunities for myself. When I graduated I went to community college for a couple of years, and my uncle's girlfriend, she was in a radiology program at this local hospital by my parents, and she was in this program for 2 years, and I was just graduating. I was in like 10th 12th grade, so I watched her go through this program. And my uncle's been doing x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans his first whole life, and he makes good money. And I was like, this is a realistic opportunity for myself if I were to pursue it. So I went to community college after I graduated, and I took all the classes to get accepted and, to apply for this program. I got accepted into it, and I lived in Elmira, New York from 2015 to about 2016, 17, I think. Um, and my alcoholism and my drug addiction, man, it took off in Elmira when I was living there. I was a hospital based program. I got this little studio apartment in Elmira, and it was not a nice part of town, man. And it was this little like 400 square foot like shoebox basically, and I just holed up in there, man. I didn't work. No, my parents paid the rent on it, so all I had to do was go to school, man, and focus on that. And that was a rough 2 years.
Is that
Uh,
when you discovered drugs?
Drugs became part of my, a little before that. I had started to get into cocaine a little bit, uh, and a lot of pills. I started to do a lot of pills. This was right before I left for radiology school. I was experimenting with hydrocodones, and I started to take some oxycodone and different things, and mixing the two. And I'd always been on a lot of psych meds, growing up because of some suicide attempts I had early on, and a couple of those 302s where you get put in a psych ward for 72 hours and you get put on some psych meds. So I'd always been on this concoction of medications on top of drinking and using. So it kind of like always turned my brain to mush. And I did this while I was trying to get through a radiology program, man. And I bring this up because growing up when I was in school, man, I had that learning disability, like that label that was placed on me. And I've never been the quickest learner. It takes me a little bit longer than the average person to get comfortable in learning and how to learn a new skill and doing things, right? So, and it's because of that, man, I always had this crippling anxiety when it was time to learn something new. When it was, a new challenge I was faced with, man, I would crumble. And not necessarily that I'd give up, but, I tried the best I could, man. But I remember doing the clinical rotations at the hospital and taking x-rays on people and learning how to do each one. And I struggled with that mightily. And it killed me inside. Like, I can't figure this out. And of course, that all or nothing thinking, like, I was getting drunk every day. And, um, you know, it was like, if this doesn't work out, what am I going to do? You know, in my head, I'm like thinking I'm going to be living at home, back home with my parents, probably working at McDonald's or something. You know what I mean? I put so much emphasis on, you know, the ability to take care of myself. And every time I failed and I ended up back, you know, asking my parents for help, it chipped away at my self-esteem just a little bit more, until by the time, you know, I was in my mid 20s, you know.
Well, you grazed over to suicide attempts. How old were you when that happened?
I tried first, the suicide attempt I made. I was a senior in high school, right before graduation, in fact. And I, you know, um, I tried to hang myself from my ceiling fan, and I was on some medication that might have caused some kind of suicide ideation or whatever. But I just remember, high school was a rough time for me, and I was at my wits end with a lot of it. I was just excited to get out of there. I didn't even want to go to graduation. I wanted to just mail me my diploma and get the hell out of there. I didn't have any real friends in high school. Like I said, I got picked on and bullied all through middle school, all through school, man, and I just hated it. Um, and I kept my headphones in every time no matter where I was in school. I mean, unless was in class. When I left class, I put my headphones in. I blocked the world out. I couldn't do it. And so by the time that, you know, this was probably a couple weeks before graduation, I actually had a professor that was starting. It wasn't even just the students that was really giving me problems, man. Some of my teachers were actually doing a lot of the same things too. And I had this professor. You know, I had started to smoke Black and Milds around that time, and I remember I smoked a Black and Mild like on during lunch, and came back into class, and I smelled like a cigar, and he was like, "Oh, look at this guy, he's a smoker," you know, in front of all the, like, it was so immature, and it was, you know, I'm like, if teachers are doing this to me, you know, teachers, you know, I guess you can, you know, other students, other kids picking on you is one thing, but once teachers start doing that, you know. And I had a professor that spread a rumor around the school that I was a creeper to a bunch of people, and back in 11th grade, uh, and man, let me tell you, yeah, it was not a pleasant experience. A lot of people in that, where I went to school, man, a lot of their, you know, it was, oh, I'm going to Wake Forest, and I'm going to Duke, and I'm going to this. And if you were going to community college, you were looked at like some second class, some third class citizen, like and it was just, I guess I just got a lot of my validation, esteem from just like trying to match that. And you know, obviously looking at it now, like, I'm grateful I didn't go to any of those schools, man, because I'd be in debt up my eyeballs. But it's just crazy how when you're younger, how you see things, and how image and reputation just changes over time. But the thing I wanted to, the gist of all that is that how I carried myself in high school and in formal, you know, in those years, it really just leaked into how I carried myself as an adult, going through my early mid 20s and stuff. And man, I could never come to peace with that experience. And alcohol and drugs was the only thing that made me feel okay, warm, and sometimes like I felt powerful. I loved being, like, if I was angry, you know, I got a certain rush out of, you know, fantasizing about, like, you know, beating those kids up, you know what I mean, or whatever, those kids that bullied me and picked on me those years. And you know, I think alcohol kind of gave me that, you know, it made it okay, man. It was the only way that I escaped. The only other healthy outlet I had, man, was books, man. I always was a reader, which is funny because they told me
That you
and
couldn't read.
reading comprehension problem, but I always was a reader. I read constantly, and you know, that was my really only other healthy escape that I had from all of it. So
How did you get into coke when you were living in a new city?
I had where I grew up, man, or where I was living there. It was a kind of a ghetto, and there was I had a couple people that ended up living in the building I lived in that I became really close friends with that helped me tremendously. But the person that lived there in the apartment before they moved in, he was smoking crack and he was doing some things, and I was able to score some drugs from him on a couple occasions. It's crazy how quickly you could find it anywhere you are, man. You could be in an igloo in Alaska and you could find what you're looking for if you're, you know, resourceful enough, which we are usually. But yeah,
Yeah, you mentioned Duke. I lived in Durham, North Carolina for a year.
mm-hmm,
I kind of ran away to get away from drugs.
mm-hmm,
And the problem is I brought myself with me. And when I moved, my fiance committed suicide. And I didn't know how to cope with it. I was drinking 6, 7 nights a week. Well, I was drinking every night, but 5 or 6 nights a week, I'd be at the bar drinking.
yep,
And when you're at a bar, you can easily find Coke. So I found myself doing Coke all the time. And, I would get pills overnighted to me from Jersey
yeah.
so I could get my pills, still to me. And I was mixing Coke with it, drinking every night. Like, it was not a good look for that year I lived in North Carolina.
No, no, not at all. But man, we don't care. Like once you're in it, that's what's crazy about this thing is like people from the outside looking in see you just in disarray and you're just, you know what I mean? But they don't understand what it's doing for you on the inside. Well, I mean, we wouldn't be addicted to it if it didn't, if there wasn't some kind of positive, reinforcement to a degree, they didn't
Yeah.
understand. That was the only thing that gave me any sense of comfort, any sense of like I felt like I belonged or man, because that's what it was, man. I hated myself. I hated everything about myself. I hated the fact that it took me longer than the normal person to figure out or learn something new. That I could never succeed at anything I tried to do. And the bottom line of it all was the reason behind that was because I couldn't the main problem, the root of all my problems is that fact that I could not get sober and I was so self-absorbed in my own chaos that I couldn't see a way out of it. And I started my first AA meeting was in Elmira, New York, actually, when I was going through all that stuff.
Yeah, I
And
was going to ask you because you said you had a bunch of bouts with AA and a bunch of relapses.
yep,
How old were you when you decided to try AA?
21, man. I turned 21. Up to that point, though, I was already drinking every day and getting it very easily, so it wasn't a matter of age or anything. That's not. But I turned 21 and I started to go to meetings that summer. I turned 20. My birthday's in March, and that's by that year in the summer I went to my first couple meetings.
How come you went through your first couple meetings? Was it family or was it yourself?
It was me, man. It was me, man. It was one of those situations where I was like, all right, I'm in a radiology program right now, and it's a 2-year program. And if I graduate, I have a job at the hospital making $25-$30 an hour taking x-rays. And my foot's in the door for more opportunities. Like it was an opportunity of a lifetime, man, to really to get my life to take off to exactly where I wanted it to be. Because remember, like for me, it was always about if I'm independent and if I'm paying my own bills and if I have a good job, if I have all this, then I will stay sober. You know what I mean? So like my motivation probably for going back to the meetings was just to try to save my ass. Maybe I can salvage some sobriety here and maybe get through the program and graduate and get a job as an x-ray tech here at the hospital if I do this. The motive behind that decision wasn't really because I wanted to quit drinking. It's because I needed to stay sober so that I could focus. But the problem was it was such a vicious cycle because I'd go into these clinical rotations and try to learn this job and learn how to do this, and I would fail at it. And every time I would fail at a competency, basically what would happen is you take the classes and the book work, but you'd have to go in, like say it was an x-ray that somebody had a chest x-ray. You got to show your instructor, and then you got to show 2 other experienced x-ray technicians that aren't related to the program that you can do it without them watching you do it in the room. So I had to I had to do it 3 times with someone watching, and I could never do it. And it was getting to the point where every time I'd fail at that, man, it would just reinforce that, like, you're slow, you have this you can't figure anything out no matter what you try to do. So it was that vicious cycle. It would give and take, and it would feed into that, and I would drink. I'd go home that day and I'd get blasted, you know what I mean? And then I'd go into clinical rotations the next day. It was a wonder. No wonder I wasn't able to do it. My brain was completely,
Mush.
it was mush, man. I was on a lot of psych meds. I was on a lot of, and I was drinking Keystone Ices and Natty Daddies and the cheapest, those 88-cent tall boy cans that you buy. You know what I mean? I was drinking that stuff, the shit that tastes like piss. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So, needless to say, that didn't work out. But that's basically what the cycle was, man. I would get myself into positions where I got back home. I would just constantly be using and drinking. I started to do the AA meetings at my hometown once I got kicked out and I moved back home. And, I went to a couple psych wards. They diagnosed me bipolar. Um, Another label. I have this thing now with labels. Like, I don't, I think, we get these diagnoses, or we get labeled a certain way, and it's up to us to decide, are we going to let that define us and limit us as to what we want to do with our life, or are we going to, like, rise above that? And for the longest time, man, I never did that. I let that shit define me, and I just used it as an excuse to drink. I'm learning. I have a learning disability. I'm slower than the rest. I'm gonna get drunk. Oh, I'm bipolar. I'm going through a manic episode. I might as well drink. Oh, I'm living at home with my parents while my peers are getting married and having kids and buying houses, and I'm still sleeping on their couch. Let's drink. You know what I mean, man? All these excuses rolling through my head, man, and I had all the potential in the world, but man, I could not arrest this problem. So, and you know, it just was insanity. I ended up at 25 years old. Finally, I got a DUI. I never had one. I didn't really have any legal consequences up until that point, and I ended up getting this DUI one night. I remember it. My mom asked me one day, and now mind you, I was drinking. I was not sober at the time, but I also wasn't getting any legal. I wasn't getting caught doing anything legally speaking. But my mom asked me one night to go get some milk from the store or whatever. So I left, went to the store, instead of getting milk, I saw the beer, bought the beer. Actually, it was Mike's Hard Lemonade. I started drinking Mike's Hard Lemonade, and this was at 5 o'clock in the evening. And from 5 o'clock in the evening, right until almost 2 a.m, I was drinking and driving. I wasn't just drinking and I was in my car driving around aimlessly with no destination, and just slamming beers all night. And I left to go hit my drug dealer up for some weed, and I was going to his house. I missed the turn, so I decided to do a 3-point turn, and it was like on one of those main roads, those county roads that you can't do 3-point turns on. I get stuck in the divot between where the grass is and and the road is, and I can't back all the way out, and I'm just rocking back and forth as I'm trying to. And a sheriff drives by, and that was it. And I remember I got out of the car, and I was like, "Arrest me! I'm drunk." I just surrendered. And it was up to that point where my parents had enough, and I decided to, the only option I had at that point was start fresh, man. I had gone to rehab out here in Pennsylvania, out in this area, that winter. And I remember the counselors telling me when I went out there, you should go to the halfway house in the Poconos. Going back home isn't a good idea. And I was like, no, I'm going to try this one more time. I'm going to go back to my parents. I'm going to get back on my feet, going to get my own place, and we're going to do this all over again. Well, come July that same year, I get a DUI. I got nowhere to go. My parents were fed up with me, and rightfully so. They did everything they could. And looking back on it now, it was the perfect opportunity. I burned all my bridges. I had nothing left. So, starting fresh in Pennsylvania was the best thing for me, man. And I rebuilt my life from that point with nothing. I went to rehab. I had the DUI. I didn't wreck my car, so I was able to sell it, pay the loan off, and I had enough to pay all my fines for the DUI. It worked seamlessly, man. But I had to start from scratch. Went to a halfway house in the Poconos in the middle of the woods, washed dishes at this restaurant for like a year, man. I paid rent. And it was a humbling experience, man. And obviously I stayed sober, but I didn't do anything to work on myself or work on these traumas that I had. And but yeah, sorry.
Why do you think it's working so well this time that you got over 2 years?
2 years this time. So this time around, man, I took an honest look at myself for the first time. I looked at myself in the mirror. And I took accountability for my part and stuff, my part in things. I looked at my part in the shipwreck that my life had become, whereas before I didn't do that. I was able to always blame somebody else. But, man, this time around was different in the sense that coming into back at AA at the time, man, I had gotten this job at Walmart. I was stocking shelves at Walmart here in the local area in where we are here in Bloomsburg. And I was doing the overnight shift, and I was drinking pretty heavily. And I started taking these pharmacy classes online, and it was like kind of like an idea in my head. Maybe this is my way out of this job. Like I can have a career and everything. And it was like, but I was still getting high and using. So it was a motivation for me to maybe put it down. But then I had to ask myself, what's the motive? Like much like before when I was in Elmira, the motive was to get sober so I could be an x-ray technician. Was my motive so I could work in the pharmacy, or was it because so I could stay sober? Well, I had enough emotional rock bottoms leading up to when I got sober where, again, I was independent paying my bills, and that wasn't keeping me sober. So I learned real quick that just having a place to live and being independent and paying your bills ain't going to keep you sober either. And it was like I became this functioning alcoholic that prolonged it longer. But yeah, man, I just decided that it was time to do it, man. I had this fear in my mind that I was going to get behind the wheel of my car that night, the last night that I drank, and kill somebody drinking and driving. And I couldn't bear it. I thought about it in my head. And ironically enough, that night, instead of getting behind the wheel of my car and going to the gas station down the street to get more Four Locos, which is what I was drinking, or Corona Lights actually that night. But I decided to go back in my house. I finished the cigarette I was smoking, and I went back in my house, and I started to write this story. I just started to write about this guy that, this idea popped in my head, like, well, what would happen if I didn't go back into the rooms and I didn't try to get sober, and I just kept doing what I was doing. What's the worst thing that could happen to me? What if I killed somebody drinking and driving? And that idea spawned this thing I started to write that night, which was over 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, so you have a book. What's your book called?
My book is called Not Yet. Never Say It Can't Happen to You. And that's what I started that night. Just what started as an idea that literally just popped in my head. It had to be God-given, man. It had to be. I was asking God heavy for help that night, and like this idea just popped in my head. And that night, it kept me from getting in my car and putting other people in harm's way. So I stuck with it. I started to write it, man, and it was so therapeutic because it was like I was writing something that was the worst case scenario. I was like playing that tape through all the way to the end if I took a drink, and that's how I was looking at how I wrote it. And as I continued to write it over these last couple of years, that's what it became. So, I became disciplined in writing. First 5 or 6 months sober, man, I got really into Stephen King novels, and that was like my escape was just I read all the classic Stephen King stuff.
Yeah.
Like 6 months straight, man. I read it. Pet Cemetery, Cujo, Misery, Shining. Like I read all these books in like a matter of 6 months. and as I'm reading those books, I'm writing my novel at the same time, and it kind of like it just fed off each other. But man, yeah, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you look at yourself honestly every day, and you have a goal in mind, man. I never thought it'd be possible. I published this novel, so
Yeah, that's awesome. And where can it be found?
what's that?
Where is it on Amazon?
The link is on my Facebook page. The book. You can order it on Amazon, and it's like I said, it's on my Facebook page. So, if anybody tunes into this, give it a look, man. It's about a guy, like I said, he's a struggling alcoholic. There's two characters in it, but he's a struggling alcoholic. He leaves a meeting and all hell breaks loose because he doesn't go back into the rooms. And it's one of those stories where, the title itself, Not Yet, man, it's something that, you hear kind of often in the rooms, when somebody compares themselves to another alcoholic that, well, that hasn't happened to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then somebody will be like, oh, that hasn't happened to you, not yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The idea that, never say it can't happen to you, and I just ran with that theme throughout this. So,
and it'll be in the description. So if you're watching this and don't know who Matt is, you can go in the description of this episode and the link will be in there for you to follow along and check out the book. What's it, $10?
It's $30 on Amazon to purchase.
Okay.
It's $30. So yeah, man, I would appreciate the support. Give it a look. The description, the overview, the plot, and the synopsis of the book are, along with the cover, are on the link when you go in, and so you can read to see what exactly the book is about and what you're getting into when you open those pages. But this has been a dream of mine. About something that, like I said, the idea just popped in my head, and it's crazy. Like, it's a miracle that, I've gotten sober, and in 2.5 years, I've been to two places I've never been, traveled to. I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico for my 30th birthday. Big Breaking Bad fan, so I went out there to see all the shooting locations, and then I went to Philadelphia. I'd never been there before, and I published a novel. That never would have thought that'd be possible. I seek God every day. I pray for his guidance. And I stopped asking God for things. I stopped asking God for, making demands, and I just seeked him authentically and let him into my life. And again, I have my days, but overall, I live a much happier, more content life than I ever have. And, that's thanks to getting back into rooms and just trying to do the best I can, and be the best person I can be, to try to be a better person than I was the day before, man. That's the end goal.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate you sitting down and coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me join you here and share my story.
Yeah, of course, bro. All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah.